as we continue studying evolution in this unit, we're going to take a look at how some scientists believe that life originated on Earth and, got from, just little tiny monomers of macromolecules to, all of the different kinds of plants and animals and bacteria, fungi, and everything else that we see around on this Earth. So starting from the beginning, some scientists believe that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that for the first billions of years, the first billion years, there was actually no life on Earth because it was too hot. Then, about 3.5 billion years ago, we see the first prokaryotes that don't use oxygen. So the oxygen wasn't in the atmosphere yet. This is what they presume. So the first prokaryotes, so the first life on Earth, was able to not utilize oxygen. Then about a billion years after that, so at 2.5 billion years ago, we get enough oxygen accumulation due to those prokaryotes, some of them going through photosynthesis. They're called cyanobacteria that do photosynthesis, and remember, in photosynthesis, one of the products is oxygen. So after about a billion years, there's enough oxygen that accumulates in the atmosphere so that 1.7 billion years ago, we could get the first eukaryotes, which were the protists. And about 700 million years after that, the first multicellular organisms called the multicellular protists. And 570 million years ago, we had all major body plans of animals, evolved. So animals evolved to plants along with fungi, move on to the land about 475 million years ago. And animals, including vertebrates, also move on to the land next. So we get this progression of life, early life being unicellular, not using oxygen, to unicellular and using oxygen, to multicellular using oxygen and starting in water, and then as creatures are made or evolve, they move from water onto land. So it's quite interesting and kind of ironic that scientists believe that life comes from existing life on Earth. So, they say that you can't just make up an organism. It has to come from an organism living here on Earth. Now, the early Earth, they postulate, was very different from today. Remember, none of us were ever there to see it. So they postulate that there was no oxygen, there was lots of lightning, and it was a harsh place, volcanic activity, ultraviolet sunlight, because the atmosphere hadn't developed and accumulated yet. So they believe it was really a violent, not fun place to be. So for life to come from life, life has to start somewhere. So this is the scientific four-stage hypothesis for the origin of life. So in this violent earth kind of place, we have abiotic synthesis of organic monomers. So all the lightning is making chemical reactions go on, and we get organic molecules made from all this chemical reactions that are facilitated by lightning. Then these abiotic, then there's abiotic synthesis of polymers. So somehow these small molecules join together to make bigger molecules. And then these bigger molecules somehow are able to replicate themselves and come together okay, come together to form pre-cells. Like they work together to form these pre-cells. Okay, so this is the scientific kind of view on how we got life from not life. Now, these pre-cells turn into more complex cells as they go around and engulf these other monomers and these organelles. They come to get these molecules come together as organelles to work together and make the first unicellular organism, I guess, which we call bacteria. And there's actually two types of unicellular organisms, bacteria and archaea. Both are prokaryotes, so they don't have a nucleus and they don't have any internal membranes. So they're very primitive cells. They're going to differ, the different types differ in structural and biochemical and physiological characteristics. And archaea, is actually more closely related to eukaryotes than to bacteria. So it's kind of like, bacteria kind of, I guess, evolved into archaea, which then led to eukaryotic cells and organisms. So eukarya are single-cell organisms that usually inhabit extreme environments that, might have been like what it was on the early Earth. So if there's something extremely salty, some eukarya can live in extremely salty conditions. Those are called halophiles. Thermophiles are these little organisms, unicellular organisms that live in extreme heat. Methanogens are eukarya that can live off of methane gas. Okay, or actually, they're anaerobic methane gas producers. So they work without oxygen and they make protein gas as a byproduct. So it's some different types of archaea. We're going to focus on bacteria as early microbial life. There's three basic shapes of bacteria. You've probably have learned this before. The cocci, which look like little spheres, bacilli, which are rod-shaped, and spirochetes, which are spiral. You may have heard of as spirilla as well, but those are more spirally shaped. Bacteria are, their kind of main purpose is to recycle chemical elements. They, take in certain chemical elements and, certain molecules and, digest them in a manner and let off other, chemicals. Bacteria can be used in bioremediation, means removal of pollutants from air, water, and soil. So they are actually very helpful. Some can cause disease, as we know, but a lot of bacteria actually can be quite useful by cleaning up the place. From bacteria and archaea, we get the evolution of protists, which are the first eukaryotic cells. So they have a nucleus and they have membrane-bound organelles. And the original protists give rise to modern-day protists and all of the other eukaryotes like plants, fungi, and animals. So these are the, very, very early eukaryotic organisms that inhabited the earth. This is always an interesting story. This is the postulation or hypothesis of how we get eukaryotic cells. It's kind of a two-stage process where eukaryotic endomembrane system develops from infolding of the prokaryotic plasma membrane. Okay, so we get all those membrane-bound organelles because part of the prokaryotic plasma membrane kind of infolds and envelops certain macromolecules and pinches off, and now we've got a membrane-bound organelle, I guess. This process is called endosymbiosis. Okay, and so that's kind of how the mitochondria, that's how they believe mitochondria and chloroplasts were enveloped into the prokaryotic cell. So if we take a look at the picture on the right, you can see that here's, the little mitochondria, okay, apparently kind of out there somewhere in the world, and this prokaryotic cell decides that it wants to eat it, in a sense, or envelop it, and so it starts to go into the plasma membrane, and the plasma membrane, pinches it off and takes it in, and now we've got a mitochondria in the cell. Awesome. Same thing with chloroplasts and other membrane-bound organelles. So there's lots of different types of protists, or these little tiny organisms that are on Earth. Most of them are unicellular, but some of them live in colonies, and some of them are actually multicellular organelles. Some examples of these protists that you may have heard of: protozoans, flagellates, amoebas, forams, ciliates, kind of all of those. You've probably heard of amoebas and protozoans before, definitely. So these guys are protists. They're just, what is thought to be the first very early life organisms on Earth. Here's just some more pictures of the different types, the parameciums and the plasmodiums, the different types of protozoans. Slime molds are also a type of protozoan, and slime molds can come in, two kinds of types. We're called plasmodial slime molds and cellular slime molds. The plasmodial slime molds are named after kind of the way that they feed. So they kind of spread themselves out as this like film of slime so that they can get more, come in contact with more things in the environment to take in and feed on. And then the cellular slime molds they're actually quite interesting. That kind of start as unicellular, and then they all find each other and come together and make, they actually reproduce sexually, which is kind of weird to think about. But in any case, all of these slime molds are usually decomposers here on Earth. So they're going to be breaking down macromolecules that are found in, other dead organisms and recycling them back to the environment. Algae are photosynthetic protists. Some are unicellular algae, and then we've got dinoflagellates, diatoms, green algae, all kinds of different algae. The diatoms are, if you've ever seen or witnessed or heard of red tide in the ocean that comes and goes, with certain seasons, those are caused by these little photosynthetic protists called diatoms. Here's a picture of a bunch of different little unicellular algae. Here's something interesting that you may not have realized. Seaweed that you find on the beaches and in the ocean is actually not a plant. Most people think it's a plant. The plant of the ocean is the seaweed. It's actually an algae. It's a very large multicellular marine algae, so it's adapted to salt water. But the funny thing is that the only thing that they have in common with plants is that they produce, or they go through photosynthesis. So they are able to take carbon dioxide and water and turn it to sugar and oxygen. They've got chloroplasts in their cells like plants, but otherwise scientists have apparently classified them as plants. Not plants, algae, not plants. So, and then obviously, kind of just like in plants, though, their chloroplasts, depending on the pigments used, can either be red, green, or brown. So we get the different colors of the seaweed because of the different chloroplast pigments that are in their cells. But again, seaweed is actually an algae, not a plant. So that's going to wrap up. It's a pretty quick chapter. It's going to wrap up this study of the first life on Earth, of the microbes, the bacteria, the archaea, and the little tiny protists.